create and provide value from infrastructure that is needed both at large for societies as well as to investors in particular, right? That is a very broad and diverse set of goals. But the role of a good financial center is to be able to do all of those things, right? And the architects of this financial center have, at least at the outset, have tried to bring together all of those things together in this financial center, right? To have the transparency, to be able to emphasize the rule of law, to be able to provide comfort to investors about value as well as about the political exposure that infrastructure represents. So in this session, what I want to do is to spend some time talking about all of those issues. I want to talk about how to create capacity within the public entities. I want to be able to talk about how to generate the right kind of private finance. And the right kind of private finance may encompass some or all of the following. It will require new instruments of various sorts. It will require new governance mechanisms. It will require bringing forth new sources of finance, new types of investors, including but not limited to pension funds and sovereign wealth funds. And most importantly, it will require political assurances, political guarantees, as well as political risk mitigation mechanisms. So that's the set of issues that I want to talk about. And finally, last but not least, all of this discussion is happening in two very large and substantial developments of our times. One of them is the Belt Road Initiative. Right? This is set up to do nothing less than change the infrastructure landscape of the world and the way economic flows are going to happen for decades to come. And the second one, the world in which we live in, all infrastructure will have to be cognizant of its environmental impact. So those are opportunities as well as challenges that we have in our times and that we would like to be able to confront through these mechanisms. So now all of that is a massive task, and luckily I am not alone. In fact, I am the smallest part of this puzzle that needs to be sorted. I am joined here by a wonderful panel. So let me quickly introduce to you the eminent panelists here. Starting from my closest to me is Mr. John Tsang. John is a senior civil servant, one of the most, probably the most distinguished civil servant of Hong Kong, who served as finance secretary, which is essentially finance minister of Hong Kong. He stepped down last year after a stint of 10 years. Interestingly, and the reason I say that he's probably the most distinguished is because I don't think any finance secretary of Hong Kong in the past or any in the future will have also taught at the Boston Public Schools, which is close to my heart because that's where I'm from. He's also a graduate of the Harvard Kennedy School, MIT, and currently advises financial institutions and is chairman of Benefit Vantage Limited, a firm that offers mobile identification solutions. So thank you, John, for being here. Next to John, or to the right, is Mr. Yang Xiaoping. He is the Secretary General of the the Asian Financial Cooperation Association. I make that mistake because AFSA is also the name of an institution that I serve on the board of. It's the Astana Financial Services Authority. This is the Asian Financial Cooperation Association. He's also a board member of the National Fund for Technology Transfer and Commercialization. And he was also named the best China financial leader in the year 2014. Dr. Xiaoping has a PhD and is a professor of economics and has to his credit 8 books that he has written. So thank you and welcome. Next to him is Mr. Baur Bektemirov. Baur is the chief economist of the Astana International Financial Center. He advises the governor of the AIFC on economic and strategic issues. He promotes fintech. He has worked at a variety of policy institutions, leading policy institutions in Kazakhstan, including the National Bank, where he was instrumental in putting in place a new monetary policy regime, the Economic Research Institute, as well as Samruk Kazyna, the sovereign wealth fund of Kazakhstan. He too, I'm proud to say, is a graduate of Harvard, as well as the University of Chicago School of Public Policy. Right. Next is Professor Naoyuki Yoshino. He is Professor Emeritus at Keio University, as well as the Dean of the Asian Development Bank Institute. He has served in a variety of different advisory roles in financial services, in infrastructure. Just late last year, or maybe early this year, under his editorship and guidance, the Asian Development Bank Institute published a major volume on Asian infrastructure. Hopefully we'll get to learn a bit about the findings from there. And he holds a PhD from Johns Hopkins University. So welcome, Professor Yoshino. And finally, to your extreme right, is Dr. Zhao Shangui. Dr. Zhao Shangui is the Chief Country Risk Analyst of the Exim Bank of China. He is an expert in geoeconomics of natural resources, in world politics, security issues that are related to energy and infrastructure. He has a PhD from Renmin University, and he is the designer of a variety of policies that provide for engagement between China and the rest of the world, the most significant one of which is the Chinese strategy towards Africa and the Investor Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC. Welcome, Dr. Shangui. What I thought we will do for this panel is that allow each speaker a few minutes to make some opening remarks, followed by some discussion amongst the panelists themselves, perhaps motivated by a few questions from my side, and then we will open up the floor for discussions. Okay. Right. So again, welcome. John, would you like to start?
Thank you very much, Akash. Delighted to be here in Astana again. Second time, it's a delightful place, and I look forward to coming back again. We have an interesting subject today, a subject that is dear to my heart. Infrastructure development, as we all know, is the driving force in the enhancement of the economic well-being of any economy. It is capable of bringing about massive benefits to the economy itself, as well as its surrounding regions. As Akash has just mentioned, key infrastructure projects are expensive, actually very expensive, and they require a long construction period to complete, from conceptualization and strategic planning through design and construction to operation, management, and maintenance. Don't forget maintenance. It's a huge cost involved in that as well. The Asian Development Bank, as Professor Deep has mentioned, estimates that for the 15-year period of 2016 to 2030, in just Asia alone, investment in infrastructure will require some $23 trillion worth of capital. This is substantial, and this has not even included the maintenance and management costs that would be required to ensure the project's lifetime usage. The responsibility for infrastructural development normally falls on the government of the day, but most public sector coffers are inadequate to give high priority to this high infrastructure expenditure over other more immediate social spending, particularly social spending with greater political mileage. So it is commonplace for economies to postpone decisions on the construction of these much-needed projects in favor of the more politically beneficial low-hanging fruits. So the gap between the need for new and necessary infrastructure and the actual level of infrastructural investment from public expenditure will widen over time. Multilateral agencies from ADB to IMF World Bank, and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB, they are redoubling their efforts, but their contributions are meager compared with the amount that is needed. So we need to look at the much larger pool of commercial financing and private capital through the use of clever project financing methodologies to support these public sector efforts to make infrastructure investment a sought-after asset class that would provide a win-win solution for everyone involved. I think we will be discussing that a little bit more later on. And capital from private sector participation, especially long-term investors looking for quality assets that match the structure of the liabilities, is a good way to unlock this dilemma. Private sector investment is an important means to help close the gap for the public sector. But we need, however, to create the right conditions for governments and investors, as well as the general public, to make these efforts possible. Since I don't have a whole lot of time, I shall now cite 3 examples from my experience in Hong Kong in the delivery of transport infrastructure projects in the use of non-government funds. I know infrastructure projects cover more than hard infrastructure. It also covers digital infrastructure and all these other kinds of infrastructure. But I think we can take a lesson from the hard infrastructure that we have some experience with. The entire area of Hong Kong, as you know, is only about 1,000 square kilometers. Developed areas takes up about only 1/4 of the total, 25%. And we have more than 2,000 kilometers of roads and freeways and a railroad network of over 200 kilometers. So I'm proud to say that we have one of the most effective public transport systems in the world. We have also a healthy fiscal position, and public infrastructure is predominantly built with the use of funds from the public purse. And during my tenure as financial secretary in Hong Kong from 2007 to 2017, my total public expenditure rose from $200 billion to more than $500 billion in 10 years' time, more than doubling. And my yearly surplus accumulated to the current amount of about $1 trillion. And this sum would enable us, just to say, to last about 2 years without any income. And public works normally takes up about 15% of annual expenditure. First of all, I would like to talk a little bit about BOT, Build, Operate, Transfer. Even though there is no need for us to borrow or to employ capital from the private sector now, we adopted the Build, Operate, Transfer, the BOT approach, in the construction of a number of roads and tunnel projects. Notably, the first cross-harbor tunnel that we built in 1969, about half a century ago. At that time, many people in the community viewed this legendary initiative as a speculative investment. And it was for the community at that time a controversial decision to proceed with this project. But with the benefit of hindsight, it was the right decision, and this strategically located tunnel has played a very important part in the economic development of Hong Kong. The private sector consortium that was chosen after an open and fair selection process, they built and they operated the tunnel, and then they transferred the tunnel back to government's ownership and management in 1999, a total of 30 years, at the conclusion of that franchise period. And during that time, the consortium itself was responsible for the construction, maintenance, and operation of the tunnel to a specified level of effectiveness, while they take in all the receipts collected from tolls and advertisements around the tunnel. And it was not until some 17 years later, in 1986, that Hong Kong embarked upon the second BOT project with the construction of the second cross-harbor tunnel. Then other projects followed with the Tate Khan Tunnel, a land road structure in 1988, the third harbor crossing in 1993, and another land tunnel in 1995. And these projects are all good examples of what we call the BOT method. We then took a different approach, the build, owned, operate, the BOO approach, with the construction of the mass transit system. The construction cost was wholly funded by government. The idea was conceived in the late 1960s, and the decision to build a system was not taken until 1973, so it took a long period of articulation. A statutory corporation was set up in 1975 to construct and to operate the system, and the first section commenced operation in 1979. In the year 2000, the statutory corporation was partially privatized through the sale of some 23% of the ownership to the public, and the shares were listed on our stock exchange. This was a significant structural change that marked the beginning of direct private sector involvement in a government corporation. In the development of the railway system, however, the government takes on a central role in the formulation of the forward-looking strategies that set out clearly the development priorities and recommended timing for investments to meet public demand in a timely manner. The corporation would, at government's request, they would prepare detailed proposals to implement the railway projects. As a listed company, they would work under prudent commercial principles in deciding on the scale of their involvement. Government did not subsidize the privatized and commercially run corporation, but government would only fill the financial gaps where it is legal and where it is relevant. And there is another financing option that is worth mentioning, and that is the rail plus property model employed in the construction of the mass transit system in Hong Kong. In the selection of the station and depot sites at strategic centers of population in Hong Kong, government would allow the corporation to buy the building rights at market price to develop living accommodation and commercial spaces on top of or close to the stations or the depots concerned. And this results in a win-win situation with the easily accessible dwellings and commercially spaces proving very convenient and attractive to the citizens. And at the same time, the residents of these developments become captive passengers of the mass transit system. They would make good use of the convenient transport system for commuting, for shopping, entertaining, without having to go outside at all. The corporation would partner with property developers in the market in the construction of these developments, so they do not do the developments themselves. And this model reduces the risk during the building stage, and once completed, helps the corporation with a continuous and steady stream of revenue to finance and operate the new lines, as well as financing the construction costs, which have been escalating with increased demand. The third example that I would like to share with you today is the employment of what we call the PPP, the public sector, the public-private participation method in highway maintenance. Like many cities, we have thousands of kilometers of roads that require maintenance all the time. And we have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to upkeep the serviceability and safety of these systems. The traditional mode was to employ works contractors to carry out the maintenance work, with government staff remaining responsible for inspecting the roads, as well as identifying and planning future works. Under the PPP approach, we aim to redefine the roles of government and the contractor in order to simplify the relationship between the two. We managed to change the contractor's role from a pure works agent to an asset manager. Government will set the performance standards to which the payment is linked. Government's role is changed to that of an auditor, ensuring the overall performance is satisfactory against an agreed set of standards. This approach has helped to reduce substantially administrative costs as well as staff time. And based on this welcome experience, we have extended the approach to other maintenance contracts as well. So ladies and gentlemen, at the heart of this experience is the establishment of a sustainable partnership that is beneficial to all the parties concerned. The government, as the project originator, needs to assess viable alternatives and select the most cost-effective method that is fair and equitable. They need to demonstrate to the investors a business case. It's very important to have a viable business case that is viable and attractive. They need also to ensure that the public interest is secure. So that is a very difficult balance to strike. And for the private sector, they have to assess the risks involved in terms of the macroeconomic climate over a long period into the future, the extent of the competition that may cannibalize the expected returns, and changes in the political makeup over a long period. And the perception of the community is an important third component besides the government and the investor. The community focuses on the quality of the service level and the affordability of the charge. They are not so interested in the implementation of the project as long as they are not suffering from prolonged inconvenience. They would also demand transparency, accountability, as well as convenience. So all in all, this is a tricky balancing act, but resultant benefits arising from the PPP approach outstrips the costs, and the experience of Hong Kong clearly demonstrates the merits of involving the private sector in the implementation of public sector projects for the good of the community. Thank you very much.
I just want to highlight one thing that John said that preceded the description of the financial models. It may not have caught your attention, but I think it's very important. He started describing the models by saying they don't really need finance. And I think there's an interesting thought about if you don't need finance to build infrastructure, why have these models? And that goes to the heart of what I was saying earlier about what the role of the financial center is. And it is not simply providing a conduit for finance, but providing a variety of things that come with finance. And I hope that we will get a chance to talk about that in some more detail. Thank you, John. Next, we have Dr. Yang Zhaiping. Thank you for your comments.
Dear Professor Lashdeep, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be here with other 4 speakers to attend this forum. The great snow mountains and the green rivers of Almaty and Astana impressed me a lot. Especially the day before yesterday, giant double rainbow bring us happiness and good luck. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Yang Zhaiping from Asia Financial Cooperation Association. It is a regional non-government and non-profit organization. Now, let me introduce my point of view of how to enhance attractiveness of infrastructure investment-related financial asset in 15 minutes, about 15 minutes. From the perspective of development economics, infrastructure is a material for facilities and provide public services to ensure social production and people's daily life. It is a public services system that guarantees the normal social and economic activities of a country or a region. It is all the direct productive activities. So it is essential in all the economic activities. The economy of a city, a local, a country, a region, or even the whole world is increasingly dependent on the improvement of infrastructure. Infrastructure also refers to the economic projects that exert direct or indirect impact to improve the output level or productivity. In other words, infrastructure construction usually has a multiplier effect, which means it can bring a meaningful increase in the total social demand and the national income that is several times higher than the investment amount, and has a considerable positive spillover effect. Some scholars say that infrastructure as a means of wealth growth. It is closely related to trading activities and industrial investment, and can bring affluence for countries like in minus resources. According to the estimate by the World Bank, 1% of stock in infrastructure responds to 1% of increase of GDP. Some experts in China have also shown that the growth rate of China's railway density and highway density is highly correlated with the growth rate of per capita GDP, with correlation coefficient of about 80%. The shortage of infrastructure in a country has a greater contribution to its economic development, as suggested by Chen Larry H. That in the development stage, when per capita income is about $140 to $1,120, the contribution rate of infrastructure to output growth will increase from 16% to 30%. However, due to the large amount of capital required and the long construction period, and its non-tradability, indivisibility, and non-exclusiveness for infrastructure construction, it is difficult to attract market-oriented private capital. And therefore, the field is always under-invested. According to estimates by the Asian Development Bank, in the next 8 to 10 years, the annual capital demand for infrastructure in Asia in $730 billion, which is as high as $800 billion according to the World Bank estimate. The two largest international financial institutions, the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, however, invested only about $30 billion a year in infrastructure in Asia. According to the AIIB, the new infrastructure demand in Asia will reach $38 trillion from 2015 to 2030. And the average annual funding gap is about $1.4 trillion. On the other hand, as President Jin Yun-king of the World Bank pointed out recently, there are currently $8.5 trillion of spare fund in the world, waiting for better investment opportunities. According to estimate by the International Money Fund, the current idle capital in global financial market is more than 7.2 trillion US dollars. International idle capital, as known as international hot money, is about a part of international short-term capital that seeks profit opportunities worldwide. Its investment targets are mainly foreign exchange, stock, and derivatives market. This poses a difficult and cutting-edge topic for the global financial industry. How to bring the large amount of spare funds and even hot money into infrastructure construction. It may be a must that we vigorously develop infrastructure with investment as an asset class. In my understanding, infrastructure investment as an asset class is a financial asset instrument or product that attracts all kinds of funds for infrastructure construction. In the form that is fictitious capital, which is independent of the real capital investment, in the form of securities, and can regularly bring in a certain amount of income to its holders, such as paper money, promissory notes, bill of exchange, stock, public bonds, real estate mortgage bills, and other paper copies of real market. The various paper copies of or financial asset based on real capital are the ongoing financial innovations in the past, present, and future. Don't underestimate this kind of financial innovation, as they can combine or facilitate many transactions or resources allocation beyond time and space, breaking through the limitation of individual capital accumulation, and instantly making big events or big achievements. This is where the wonder of finance lies. Infrastructure construction calls for such wonderful finance. The various paper copies of financial assets based on real market maximally mobilize and attract the various types of funds for infrastructure construction. In fact, the international financial industries, as well as that in China, have made numerous beneficial and active explorations in this area, fortunately for the infrastructure investment as an asset class, or launched a series of traditional financial asset instruments that are related to infrastructure. The first is public offering bonds, such as government bonds, corporate bonds, financial bonds, etc. The second is private placement bonds, including some non-publicly offered senior debts and subordinated debts. The third is listed infrastructure construction companies. The stock of such companies are characterized as defensive and can increase the portfolio's diversification and disperse investment risks. The fourth is private equity. Investing unlisted infrastructure construction companies has high yields, and the risk is also higher. The fifth is asset-backed securities, ABC, including the securitization of the future free-based income rights or completed infrastructure projects as the underlying asset. And the securitization of the fiscal subsidy fund in TPP projects that the local government as the debtors should pay or bear as the underlying asset. ABS originally appeared in the United States in 1970s, and currently the ABS market is rather large in the United States and Europe. The asset securitization market in China has developed rapidly, and mainly includes three types: credit asset-backed securities, CLO, supervised by the central bank and the China's Banking Regulation Commission. The corporate ABC, which is supervised by the China Security Regulatory Commission, and the ABN of National Association of Financial Market Institution Investors. Last year, the insurance of ABS was about 1.5 trillion yuan, an increase of 67.52% compared with 2016, in which the infrastructure charging rights accounted for about 10% of total amount. If the introduction of a large amount of spare funds and hot money in the infrastructure construction means that we must actively develop the infrastructure investment as an asset class. Then the key question is, what kind of infrastructure as an asset class or fictitious capital in the form of paper copies of financial asset based on real capital for infrastructure investment can attract all kinds of capital? In short, it must be highly unified in terms of profitability, liquidity, and safety. However, it is not easy to have infrastructure investment-related financial asset with high degree profitability, liquidity, and safety. On the one hand, it requires the financial practitioners to provide pragmatic and brilliant financial planning and product development to combine and facilitate the infrastructure investment-related transactions or resource allocations beyond time and space to the utmost. And on the other hand, it requires the effective operation of the actual or functional capital invested in the infrastructure projects. The relationship between the two aspects is the relationship between fictitious capital and functional capital. Only by joint effort from the two aspects can we create infrastructure investment-related financial asset that is highly unified in profitability, liquidity, and safety, so as to maximally attract all kinds of spare money or hot money to invest in infrastructure construction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Yang Xiaoping, for your comments. I think he took some of the points that John was making earlier about the availability of finance and has given it a global dimension. One of the biggest conundrums of our times is when we have so much money lying around and there's more money in liquid form sloshing around the world than there has ever been. Why is there such a shortage of finance for infrastructure? That goes at the heart of the conversation at the financial center, which seeks to be the conduit of these funds to the needs that are. In the interest of time, may I urge the remaining panelists to keep their comments closer to 5 minutes if possible, so that we have time for discussion as well. Our next speaker, Bauerbek Temirov, he will tell us, I suppose, a little bit about the financial center as well as about the infrastructure issues in Kazakhstan. So, Bauer.
Yes, thank you. It's very hard to follow such an excellent detailed speech of Dr. Yang Xiaoping, and I'll be rather general and less specific. But I want to take a step back and tell why we think in Kazakhstan, I'm here being the only person from Astana, or for that matter from Kazakhstan, I want to speak about Kazakhstan obviously, why we think that it's important for us. It is no secret Kazakhstan is a commodity export country, and we've been enjoying oil exports for many years. We've been enjoying very fast growth in 2000 due to the oil income, but we understand this is not very sustainable. And the global financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and the drop in oil prices in 2014, 2015 proved that. And we've seen really big troubles, and we had to make significant reforms in order to sustain the growth. This is why we believe that, for example, infrastructure investment has different perspective and it has different nature. And as Dr. Xiaoping just mentioned, it has a really good multiplier effect. And for example, for that matter, actually, it was big fiscal stimulus program in 2015 when the government spent about $10 billion on infrastructure investment. It was important because it did not only help the economy at that moment, and we did not fall into recession, and we created jobs, and we created some activity, but also laid basis for future development, because again, infrastructure is a long-term project. You invest today, you're going to benefit from it maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or for many years from now. But it has also had good effect, because only in last year we've seen, I think, 4-fold increase in transportation of goods through Kazakhstan. It was mainly going from China to Europe. But we've seen this increase, and it's also partially due to the better infrastructure, better roads, and better railroads, both railroad and automobile roads. And again, this is very important. And when we talk about infrastructure investment, this is long-term. This is very different from oil investment, for example. This requires for special purpose, the special companies, the special purpose vehicles, because this requires for different structuring and deals, because when you deal with the long-term projects and when you deal with, for example, international projects spanning over different countries, there are many issues that can raise, and that's why we need better structures. So what we did in the Astana Financial Center, we thought that we can become the platform for infrastructure investment, both in private and in direct and portfolio form. In portfolio form, this is easy. We just, this is stock exchange, and the companies can raise capital, they can raise equity, and also issue infrastructure bonds. I think this is important because infrastructure bonds will be a very important market for Kazakhstan to go further, because we want to rely on our long-term capital, want to rely on our sovereign wealth funds, want to rely on our pension fund, which requires long-term money, because this is the fund for future generations. And today in country we have, I think, in my belief, we lack good long-term projects that could develop stable return. In addition to that, we want to provide, as it's been said a few times, that this infrastructure investments also calls for better governance and better transparency and better, in some cases, dispute resolution matter, because when you deal with project that spans over 4 countries, and if there's one delay in one country, how do you solve the problem? How do you answer the cash call for the project? How do you deal with that? So summing up together, we are developing this. We have built both exchange infrastructure and regulatory infrastructure. This year, we have already prepared regulation for example, SPVs that would allow creating structuring investment through the AFC. We're working on creating trust infrastructure, which in essence, very similar to what we need in infrastructure. This is, it's more about real estate, but it's in fact very similar. And we're looking forward to host this. We're talking to different institutions. We are happy to say, for example, that the government, the Bank of Development of China is now present at the AFC, because that's one of the most important players in investing in the Belt and Road Initiative. I'm not going to tell a lot about Belt and Road Initiative because we discussed it this morning, and we're going to discuss it through the session, of course. But just to point out that infrastructure investment is a big thing, and it's very important for this region. It's very important for emerging countries. It's very important for countries along Belt and Road. And I hope that we have the right platform. I hope we have the right instruments to move forward with this.
Thank you very much for that quick overview of the experience in Kazakhstan and the region with infrastructure. Next, we move to Professor Naoki Yoshino. Please come up. Professor Yoshino, you have seen the Japanese experience with this, and you have also studied and looked deeply at the Asian experience. So
yes, thank you very much for introduction. I have prepared the slides, so I'd like to start from my slides. Okay, thank you very much. First, I think it is very important to circulate domestic savings into domestic infrastructure investment. And domestic savings includes not only deposits, but also insurance and pension funds. And insurance and pension funds are long-term financing. So it is very important to have variety of savings and circulate those savings into infrastructure investment. So left-hand side, you can see domestic bank deposits, insurance, pension funds. Each asset class has a different maturity and different risk appetite. Some of them want to invest into bond market. Some of them want to invest into equity market. Some of them are very safe assets. So we can look at on the right-hand side, the variety of investment. And one of those asset classes are the infrastructure. And then next, this is often referred about ADB's study, how much infrastructure will be needed from 2016 to 2030. So this means huge. And government money and international organizations' finance is not enough. So we have to bring private sector financing. However, the rate of return on private finance is very low. So I'm going to propose today is to utilize spillover effects and return those spillover effects to infrastructure investors, especially focusing on incremental tax revenues. Infrastructure has direct effect in this line. Red one is direct effect. But good infrastructure bring private sector activities, SMEs, private companies, and that will increase employment. So those incremental increase of private capital and labor, that will create spillover effects. In the past, all these spillover effects were captured by local government. Suppose this red line is highway or railway. Then after a while, companies comes into the region, employment will be created. So in the yellow portion of the part has externality effects, spillover effects, compared to other regions. And these spillover tax revenues all enjoyed by local government, and they were not returned to infrastructure investors. So in other words, infrastructure investors are only this green line, user charges. And often, suppose it is electricity, water supply, then prices are regulated by the government. User charges are not enough to capture the rate of return from infrastructure investors from private sector. That is why public-private partnership was not doing very well. However, water supply creates high price of housing, and new apartment will be created, new industries comes into the region. The red line is the tax revenues of the region caused by these infrastructure investment. And if part of these tax revenues were returned to infrastructure investors, then dotted blue line is the actual rate of return, which is much higher than user charges. And we can look at the case of the Philippines. In the last row is the Batangas city. Sorry, this number is a little bit small. T-1, T0 is a period of construction. Then the tax revenue has increased. And after this highway is completed, T1, T2, tax revenue has slightly diminished. But if you look at the last column 4, T+4, the tax revenue almost went up double, because many companies fully utilize these roads and they can benefit a lot. And if 50% of these incremental tax revenues were returned to the infrastructure investors, then their rate of return would have been increased 38%. So that means a big increase of their rate of return. So my proposal is, in the bottom, is in good infrastructure can create external effects that will increase property tax, income tax, corporate tax, sales tax. And part of those tax revenue should be injected as subsidies from the government to infrastructure investors. And that will increase the rate of return for infrastructure investment. Next case is Uzbekistan's railway. In Uzbekistan's railway, and in this case, connectivities will create much further increase of rate of return, connecting to the market. Then small businesses, agricultural farmers, services sector can sell those products. Then from my estimates, by this railway, agricultural sector increased 1% of output. And then industrial sector was 7%, services sector about 5%. So the infrastructure create big spillover effects together with connectivity to the market. Last example is Japan's bullet train. During the construction period, there's an increase of GDP in the region. But for a while, it has diminished. Even after the completion of this railway, high-speed railway, tax revenue decreased. But after this rapid train is connected to Tokyo and Osaka, large city, then the tax revenue started to increase. So again, infrastructure is very important for connectivity. That will increase the rate of return on tax revenues. So these tax revenues should be returned to the infrastructure investors. And then we can also introduce bond scheme, revenue bond for infrastructure investment. This revenue bond captures those tax revenues. Then government may purchase 40% of it, private sectors purchases 60% of it. Then it is very easy risk sharing and also the share of rate of return. So these infrastructure company can set up SPV, and then that can capture the spillover tax revenue and also user charges. We can also introduce equity investors into this scheme, government financing and bond, and then equities. And then that will make a variety of infrastructure investors into the project. Based on Japanese experience, please look at the last row. Suppose 50% of these spillover tax revenues were returned to infrastructure investors. How much it would have been increased rate of return? Then 1950s, 60s, 43.8%. Suppose the rate of return was 10%. Then the rate of return goes up 43.8%. and even recently 39%. So these tax revenue, spillover tax revenue, has a significant impact into the region. And lastly, I would like to talk about in Asian region. In order to increase spillover effects, we have to finance money to startup businesses and small businesses. Left-hand side bottom is Cambodian lady who wanted to start small shop along road. Right-hand side bottom is 40 Vietnamese ladies who wants to start their own business along railways. They are difficult to borrow money from banks. So we have to provide startup financing to them. Hometown crowdfunding was created in Japan, Cambodia, Vietnam, and probably in Mongolia. And that is providing startup money to those individuals. And that will increase spillover effects, and tax revenue will go up much further. So that is this hometown investment trust funds. Lastly, we found out